The cemetery was quiet under the gray autumn sky. Richard Caldwell walked slowly along the stone path, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He carried white roses, the kind his son had always loved. 3 years had passed since Daniel died, but the pain felt as fresh as the day he received that terrible phone call from the military. Richard was 72 years old and one of the wealthiest men in the country. He owned aerospace companies that built satellites and spacecraft for governments around the world. Money had given him everything except the one thing he wanted most, which was his son back. Daniel had been 24 when he died, full of life and dreams. The military said it was a training accident. They gave Richard a folded flag and their condolences, then sealed the file as classified. As Richard approached Daniel's grave, he noticed someone was already there. A young woman sat on the grass beside the headstone, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Her dark hair fell around her face as she cried. Richard stopped walking, unsure whether to interrupt her grief. He had never seen anyone else visit Daniel's grave before. The woman looked up and saw him standing there. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She wiped her face quickly and started to stand, clearly embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. Richard raised his hand gently to tell her she did not need to leave. "I am sorry," the woman said, her voice breaking. "I did not mean to intrude. I will go now." "Please stay," Richard said softly. "Did you know my son?" The woman looked at him with surprise and recognition. "You are Richard Caldwell, Daniel's father." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "My name is Maya Torres. My mother, Carmen, used to work as your housekeeper many years ago." Richard remembered Carmen well. She had worked for his family when Daniel was young, a kind woman who made excellent meals and kept their home spotless. She left when her husband got a job in another state. Richard nodded slowly. "I remember your mother. She was wonderful. But how did you know Daniel?" Maya's eyes filled with tears again. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was an engagement ring, simple but beautiful. "Daniel and I were going to get married. Nobody knew about us because we wanted to wait until the right time to tell everyone. We had been together for 2 years before he died." Richard felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. His son had been engaged? Daniel had never mentioned anyone special. They spoke every week on the phone, and Daniel never said a word about a girlfriend, let alone a fiancé. "Why did he keep it secret?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel said you would not approve," Maya explained. "I was just a graduate student working on my physics doctorate. My family did not have money or connections. He worried you would think he was making a mistake, settling for less than he deserved. But we loved each other and we planned to tell you after he finished his military service." Richard sat down heavily on the stone bench near the grave. He felt ashamed. Had he been so focused on status and success that his son feared his judgment? He looked at Maya with new eyes, seeing the intelligence and strength in her face despite her tears. "I would have welcomed you," he said quietly. "Anyone who made Daniel happy would have been welcome in our family." Maya smiled sadly and sat back down on the grass. "That is kind of you to say now. But I did not come here just to visit Daniel's grave. I came because I finally decoded something he sent me before he died, and I needed to tell him what I found. Except he is gone, so I am telling you instead." Richard leaned forward, confused. "What do you mean? What did he send you?" Maya pulled out her phone and opened an encrypted file. 3 days before Daniel died, I received a message from him. It was heavily encrypted with layers of protection I had never seen before. The message said that if anything happened to him, I should decrypt this file and give it to someone who could help. It took me 3 years to break through all the security, but I finally did it last week. She showed Richard the screen. It displayed coordinates, technical schematics, and strings of data that meant nothing to him. But at the top of the file was a message in Daniel's handwriting, scanned and attached. Richard recognized his son's neat printing immediately. The message read, "If you are reading this, I am probably dead. What I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but it is the truth. My unit was sent on a classified mission to intercept an alien probe detected at the edge of our solar system. The probe came from a dying civilization, trying to warn us about something terrible heading our way. The government knows about it but is planning to save only a few people and let everyone else die. Maya, you are the smartest person I know. Use this data to find another way. Save them. Save everyone." Richard read the message 3 times, his hands trembling. Alien probe? Dying civilization? Government cover-up? It sounded like science fiction, but Daniel had never been one for jokes or fantasies. He was practical and serious, especially about his work. "Do you believe this?" Richard asked Maya. "I did not want to," Maya admitted. "But I analyzed the technical data in these files. The mathematics are real. The physics are beyond anything we have published. But they are consistent and logical. Someone or something sent this probe and Daniel's team intercepted it. That is why they died. Not in some training accident, but in deep space, trying to protect Earth from a threat nobody else knows about." Richard looked at his son's headstone. The inscription read, "Captain Daniel Caldwell, beloved son, died in service to his country." But that was a lie. Daniel died in service to all of humanity, and nobody except this brave young woman knew the truth. "What does the warning say?" Richard asked. "What is coming?" Maya's expression darkened. "I am still translating parts of it, but from what I understand, there is something the probe's creators called the Harvesters. They are like machines, but alive in some way. They move through space, consuming everything biological they find. Every few thousand years, they sweep through this part of the galaxy. According to the probe's timeline, they will reach Earth in about 14 months. Richard felt cold despite his heavy coat. 14 months. Little more than a year until something came to destroy humanity, and almost nobody knew about it. He looked at Maya, at this young woman his son had loved and trusted enough to give her this terrible burden. Daniel chose well. Maya was strong and brilliant, exactly the kind of person who could make sense of impossible situations. "Will you help me?" Maya asked. "I cannot do this alone. I need resources, people, and most of all, I need someone who can get answers from the military and the government. They told you Daniel died in a training accident. They lied to you. Make them tell the truth. Make them help us find a way to stop what is coming." Richard stood up and offered Maya his hand. She took it and he pulled her to her feet. He looked one more time at his son's grave, making a silent promise. Daniel's death would not be meaningless. If there was even a chance that Maya was right, Richard would spend every dollar he had and use every connection he possessed to give humanity a fighting chance. "Yes," Richard said firmly, "I will help you. We will find the truth together, and we will finish what Daniel started." Richard Caldwell had not built a fortune by trusting words alone. He needed proof, solid evidence that what Maya told him was real and not the grief-driven fantasy of a heartbroken young woman. The morning after meeting her at the cemetery, he began making phone calls. His first call went to General Peter Hughes, an old friend who owed Richard several favors. Hughes had helped expedite contracts for Richard's aerospace company over the years, and Richard had donated generously to veteran programs the general supported. When Richard asked about Daniel's real mission, the phone line went silent for a long moment. "Richard, I cannot talk about classified operations," Hughes finally said, his voice tight and uncomfortable. "My son is dead," Richard replied coldly. "I deserve to know why he really died. He died serving his country. That is all I can tell you." "Then tell me about the Frontier Response Team," Richard pressed. "Tell me about the probe your people intercepted 18 months before Daniel died." The silence that followed was longer this time. Richard heard Hughes breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "Where did you hear those names?" the general asked quietly. "Does it matter? I know enough to know you have been lying to me for 3 years. Either you tell me the truth now, or I will go to every news organization in the country and tell them what I know. My name still carries weight, Peter. People will listen." Hughes cursed under his breath. "You cannot do this. National security is at stake. National security or a cover-up?" Richard demanded. "Which is it?" Another long pause, then Hughes spoke in a resigned voice. "Meet me tomorrow at the Lincoln Memorial. 2 in the afternoon. Come alone and tell nobody where you are going. I will give you 30 minutes and then we never speak of this again." Richard agreed and ended the call. He looked across his office desk at Maya, who had been listening to the conversation on speakerphone. Her eyes were wide with hope and fear. "He knows something," she said. "We were right." "Knowing something and telling us are different things," Richard cautioned. "But it is a start." They spent the rest of the day analyzing the data Daniel had sent. Maya set up her laptop in Richard's private study, filling 3 monitors with equations and diagrams. Richard watched her work with admiration. She moved through complex calculations with the same ease most people showed reading a newspaper. Her fingers flew across the keyboard and she muttered to herself in technical language Richard could barely follow. This section here, Maya said, pointing to a cluster of equations. This describes the probe's propulsion system. It uses something called quantum tunneling to move through space. The math suggests it can travel faster than light without actually breaking the speed limit. It is like cheating physics by using a loophole nobody knew existed. Richard leaned closer to the screen. The equations meant nothing to him, but he could see the excitement in Maya's face. "Can we build something like this?" he asked. "Not yet," Maya admitted. "But the probe's creators left instructions like a textbook teaching us their technology. If we had enough time and resources, maybe in 10 or 20 years, we could replicate it. But we do not have 10 or 20 years. We have 14 months. The next afternoon, Richard drove to Washington alone. He parked near the Lincoln Memorial and walked to the agreed meeting spot. General Hughes was already there, standing by the wall inscribed with Lincoln's second inaugural address. He looked older than Richard remembered, with deep lines around his eyes and gray streaking through his hair. "You should not have pushed this," Hughes said without greeting. "Some secrets need to stay buried." "My son's death is not a secret I will let stay buried," Richard replied. "Tell me what happened." Hughes looked around to make sure nobody was close enough to hear them. Tourist groups moved past in the distance, taking photos and talking loudly, but the area around them was clear. The general pulled a thin folder from inside his jacket and handed it to Richard. "This is a copy of Daniel's mission report," Hughes said. "The original is classified above top secret. If anyone finds out I gave this to you, I will go to prison for the rest of my life. Read it and then burn it. Do not copy it. Do not share it. Just read it and understand why we cannot tell people the truth." Richard opened the folder. Inside were a dozen pages of typed text and several photographs. The first photo showed a cylindrical object floating in space, maybe 30 feet long and covered in markings that looked like circuit patterns. The object glowed with a faint blue light. He read Daniel's report slowly. His son described approaching the probe with his team of 6 specialists. They had trained for months for this mission, learning to operate in deep space conditions. When they made contact with the probe, it transmitted a massive data file directly into their ship's computer. The file contained warnings, technical specifications, and a message from the probe's creators. The message explained that a species called the Viridian Collective had built and launched thousands of warning probes across the galaxy before their civilization collapsed. They were trying to warn other intelligent species about the harvesters, massive machine entities that consumed all biological matter to fuel their expansion. The harvesters moved in predictable patterns, sweeping through regions of space every few thousand years like clockwork. Daniel's team analyzed the data and realized Earth was directly in the harvesters' projected path. They would arrive in approximately 3 years from the date of the report. Daniel recommended immediately beginning preparations for planetary defense and attempting to evacuate as many people as possible to colony ships. The last entry in the report was dated 5 days before Daniel died. He wrote that his team had been ordered to destroy the probe and all evidence of its existence. High-level government officials decided that revealing the truth would cause global panic and collapse. They chose secrecy over preparation. Daniel wrote in the final paragraph, "I cannot follow this order in good conscience. I am sending copies of the data to trusted sources. If we are going to die, we deserve to die trying to survive, not in ignorance. May God forgive me for what I am about to do." Richard closed the folder with shaking hands. He looked at Hughes with anger burning in his chest. "You ordered my son to destroy humanity's only warning? You chose to let billions of people die without even trying to save them? It was not my decision," Hughes said defensively. "Orders came from the very top. The analysis showed we could not stop the harvesters with any technology we possess. Fighting them would be suicide. The only rational choice was to save who we could and accept the rest." "Who are you planning to save?" Richard demanded. Hughes looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "There are 12 deep space colony ships under construction at hidden facilities. Each can carry 5,000 people. We have been selecting candidates based on skills, genetics, and yes, wealth. Donors who can help fund the project. You and your family were on the list, Richard. When the time comes, you will be offered a place." Richard felt sick. 60,000 people saved while billions died. His son had died trying to stop this monstrous plan, and the people who killed him thought they were being pragmatic. "Daniel sent the data to Maya Torres before he died," Richard said. "She has spent 3 years decoding it. She believes there is another way." Hughes's expression hardened. Maya Torres is a name in our files. We have been monitoring her since Daniel died. She is brilliant, but she is also young and idealistic. Tell her to stop digging. Tell her to accept the reality of the situation. When the time comes, we can offer her a place on the ships too. Let her live, Richard. Do not let her throw her life away on false hope. What happened to Daniel? Richard asked. The report ends before his death. How did he die? The general's face went pale. His ship's life support system malfunctioned during the return journey. The official investigation ruled it was a systems failure, but you are smart enough to read between the lines. Daniel disobeyed direct orders from the highest levels of government. They could not let him come home and spread the information, so they made sure he did not come home. Richard felt tears burning in his eyes. His son had been murdered. Not killed in battle or lost in an accident, but murdered by his own government because he tried to save innocent lives. You are monsters, Richard whispered. We are realists, Hughes replied. And you need to become one too. Go home. Enjoy the time you have left. When we contact you about the colony ships, get on board and do not look back. That is the only way you survive this. The general turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing alone with the folder in his hands. He looked up at the statue of Lincoln, that great president who fought to save a nation divided. Lincoln had believed that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was easy. Daniel had believed the same thing. Richard made his decision. He would not get on a colony ship while the rest of humanity burned. He would use every resource he possessed to give people a fighting chance. Maya believed there was another way, and Richard would help her find it. They would finish what Daniel started, no matter the cost. He drove back home and told Maya everything Hughes had said. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more determined with every word. When he finished, she looked at him with steel in her eyes. They murdered him, she said quietly. Richard's first step was to assemble a team. He could not do this alone, and Maya needed help beyond what one billionaire could provide. They needed scientists, engineers, and people who understood both the technology in Daniel's files and the politics of keeping such dangerous knowledge secret. Richard owned a private research facility in Montana, originally built to develop satellite technology away from prying eyes. The facility sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, isolated enough that they could work without interruption. He transferred a dozen of his most trusted employees there and told them they were working on a classified government contract. That part was not entirely a lie. Maya moved into a cabin on the facility grounds and set up her equipment. She worked 18 hours a day, sometimes more, analyzing every byte of data Daniel had sent. Richard hired 3 more physicists to assist her, carefully vetted people who had security clearances and reputations for discretion. He told them they were researching theoretical propulsion systems. He did not mention aliens or harvesters yet. That truth would come later, after they had proven themselves trustworthy. 2 weeks into the project, Maya made her first major breakthrough. She burst into Richard's office at midnight, her hair wild and her eyes red from staring at computer screens, but her face glowed with excitement. I found it, she announced breathlessly. The warning was not just about the harvesters. The Viridian Collective included defense specifications. They discovered a way to disrupt harvester operations using quantum resonance technology. Richard set down the financial reports he had been reviewing and gave Maya his full attention. Explain it in terms I can understand, he requested. Maya grabbed a marker and walked to the whiteboard on the wall. She drew a simple diagram showing wavy lines intersecting. The harvesters operate on predictable quantum frequencies. They use those frequencies to coordinate their fleet and to break down biological matter into energy. The Viridian Collective learned that if you create interference patterns at specific frequencies, you can disrupt their coordination and make it impossible for them to harvest. Like jamming a radio signal? Richard asked. Exactly like that, Maya confirmed. But on a quantum level. The problem is that generating enough interference to affect something as large as the harvester fleet requires enormous amounts of energy and perfect coordination across multiple planetary installations. The Viridian Collective tried to build such a system, but their civilization collapsed before they could complete it. That is why they sent the warning probes instead. They hoped other species might succeed where they failed. Richard studied the diagram, his mind already calculating costs and logistics. How many installations would we need? At minimum, 12 facilities spread across Earth's surface and another 6 in orbital positions, Maya explained. Each facility would need its own quantum resonance generator, which is technology we have never built before. The specs are in Daniel's files, but translating alien engineering into human manufacturing will take time and resources. How much time? Richard pressed. Maya's excitement faded. Working with unlimited resources and global cooperation, maybe 18 months to 2 years. Working in secret with limited funding, 5 to 10 years, and we have 14 months before the harvesters arrive. The reality of their situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Even if they dedicated every resource Richard possessed to the project, they could not build the defense network in time. Not alone, not in secret, and not without cooperation from governments around the world. Then we need to make this not a secret, Richard said slowly. We need to go public. Maya shook her head firmly. If we do that, the government will shut us down immediately. General Hughes made it clear they want this information buried. They have the power to destroy us, Richard. They killed Daniel. They will kill us too. Then we make it so they cannot silence us without making things worse, Richard replied. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the facility. Down below, lights burned in the research buildings where scientists worked late into the night. We need insurance. We need to make sure that if something happens to us, the truth gets out anyway. Over the following month, Richard quietly reached out to journalists he trusted, lawyers who specialized in whistleblower protection, and foreign diplomats who had reasons to distrust the United States government. He did not tell them everything yet, but he laid groundwork for what would come. He also transferred copies of Daniel's data to secure servers in 5 different countries, with instructions to release the information publicly if anything happened to him or Maya. Meanwhile, the research team made progress. The physicists working with Maya managed to build a small-scale prototype of the quantum resonance generator. It was only the size of a microwave oven, but when they activated it, the device created measurable quantum interference across the entire facility. Computers glitched, radio signals scrambled, and one researcher's pacemaker stopped working until they shut the device down. It works, Maya said with satisfaction. We can build the technology. Now we just need to build it big enough and fast enough. But time was not on their side. 8 months had passed since Richard and Maya first met at Daniel's grave. They now had only 6 months until the harvesters arrived according to the probe's countdown. Richard had spent nearly $100 million on the project, and they had barely scratched the surface of what needed to be done. Then Richard made the decision that would change everything. He called a press conference and invited media from around the world to his corporate headquarters. Maya begged him not to do it, warning that the government would move against them the moment he revealed the truth. But Richard was firm. They had run out of time for caution. The conference room filled with reporters, cameras, and curious executives from rival companies, wondering what announcement Richard Caldwell was about to make. Richard walked to the podium with Maya beside him. He had prepared no speech. He would simply tell the truth and let the world decide what to do with it. 3 years ago, my son Daniel died, Richard began. The military told me he died in a training accident. That was a lie. Daniel died on a classified mission to intercept an alien probe at the edge of our solar system. The probe carried a warning from a dying civilization about a threat heading toward Earth. That threat will arrive in 6 months. The room erupted with noise. Reporters shouted questions and cameramen pushed forward to get better angles. Richard raised his hand for silence and continued speaking. The United States government knows about this threat. They have known for years. Instead of warning the public and preparing a defense, they chose secrecy. They are building colony ships to save a select few thousand people, while planning to let the rest of humanity die in ignorance. My son died because he refused to accept that plan. He tried to get the truth out and they murdered him for it. Richard nodded to Maya, who activated a screen behind them. Images from Daniel's files appeared, showing the alien probe, the technical specifications, and translated messages from the Viridian Collective. The mathematical equations and scientific data scrolled past, too complex for most viewers to understand, but undeniably real and detailed. This is not a hoax, Richard stated firmly. This is not science fiction. This is the truth that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. We have 6 months to prepare a defense, 6 months to build technology that might save our species. But we cannot do it alone. We need global cooperation, shared resources, and the combined effort of every nation on Earth. Maya stepped forward and explained the quantum resonance technology, simplifying the concepts for the general audience. She described what needed to be built and the timeline they faced. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger as she spoke, her passion and conviction evident to everyone watching. Daniel Caldwell died trying to save all of us, Maya concluded. Not just the wealthy or the powerful, but everyone. He believed humanity was worth fighting for. We have the technology to fight. We have the intelligence to win. What we need now is the courage to try. The press conference ended with chaos. Security guards had to escort Richard and Maya out through a back entrance as reporters mobbed them with questions. Within an hour, the footage was broadcasting on every news channel worldwide. Within 2 hours, government officials issued statements calling Richard's claims a hoax perpetrated by a grief-stricken father. Within 4 hours, internet servers around the world began releasing the encrypted files Richard had prepared, making Daniel's data available to anyone who wanted to verify the claims. The world reacted with a mixture of panic, denial, and anger. Some people believed immediately. Others insisted it was an elaborate fraud. Government scrambled to suppress the information, but it was too late. The truth had spread too far and too fast to be contained. Richard and Maya returned to the Montana facility and waited. They knew the government would come for them. General Hughes had warned them what would happen if they interfered with official policy. They had defied that warning in the most public way possible. 2 days after the press conference, black helicopters landed at the facility. Agents in dark suits arrested Richard and Maya on charges of espionage and theft of classified information. They seized all the computers and research. Richard spent 9 days in detention before the situation changed. 9 days of isolation, plain food, and no information about the outside world. Then on the 10th morning, the guards came and escorted him to a conference room. Maya was already there, looking thin and tired but unbroken. They were not allowed to speak to each other before 3 men in expensive suits entered the room. The lead man introduced himself as Secretary of Defense Walter Price. He sat down across from Richard and Maya with a folder thick with documents. His expression was neutral, giving nothing away. "You have created quite a mess, Mr. Caldwell," Price began. "Your press conference has had global repercussions. 14 countries have demanded access to the alien probe data. The United Nations has called emergency sessions. Stock markets worldwide have lost trillions in value. People are panic buying supplies and fleeing cities. 5 governments have collapsed as citizens learned their leaders plan to abandon them." "Good," Richard said without apology. "People deserve to know the truth." Price tapped the folder in front of him. "The truth is complicated. Yes, we knew about the probe. Yes, we determined that saving everyone was impossible with our current technology. The colony ship program was not about abandoning humanity, but about ensuring our species survived. Someone had to make the difficult decisions. Someone had to play God and decide who lives and who dies," Maya corrected sharply. "That is what you mean," the secretary's jaw tightened. "We had limited time and resources. The analysis showed that attempting a planetary defense would fail and waste the time needed to build evacuation ships. We chose survival over false hope." "You chose cowardice over courage," Richard replied. "You gave up without trying." Price opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. They showed the quantum resonance generator prototype from Richard's facility. "Your research team made impressive progress. The technology works on a small scale, but scaling it up to planetary defense levels requires resources beyond what any single nation possesses. It requires global cooperation, shared technology, and unified command structure. Do you understand how impossible that is?" "It is only impossible if people like you keep saying it is impossible," Maya said. "Daniel believed we could do it. I believe we can do it. The question is whether you will help us or keep standing in our way." Price leaned back in his chair and studied them both carefully. "There is a reason I came here personally instead of sending subordinates. Your press conference changed everything. We can no longer keep this situation contained. The information is out there, and millions of people are now analyzing the data you released. Scientists worldwide are confirming that your claims are legitimate." "So you are admitting we were right?" Richard asked. "I am admitting the situation has evolved," Price replied carefully. "The president wants to make you an offer. We will drop all charges against you and Maya. We will provide government resources to assist with building the quantum resonance network. In exchange, you will publicly state that the colony ship program was a contingency plan, not an abandonment plan. You will help us restore order and convince the public that we are all working together now." Richard and Maya looked at each other. The offer was tempting. Government support would give them access to resources and personnel they desperately needed. But it came with strings attached, strings that meant covering up the government's original intentions and Daniel's murder. "No," Maya said before Richard could respond. "We will not lie for you. The public deserves to know what you plan to do. They deserve to know that people like Daniel had to die because they stood against your cowardice." Price's expression hardened. "You are letting your emotions cloud your judgment. We are offering you a chance to save lives. Is your pride worth more than that?" "This is not about pride," Richard said quietly. "This is about whether humanity deserves leaders who tell the truth. You want us to help you restore trust while covering up the reasons people stopped trusting you in the first place. That is not justice. That is not honor. That is just more lies." The secretary stood up and gathered his photographs. "Then you are both fools. You will remain in detention until we decide what to do with you. The government will move forward with defense preparations without your input. History will remember you as the man who chose principles over practicality, Mr. Caldwell. I hope that brings you comfort." Price and his assistants left the room. The guard separated Richard and Maya again, but not before Maya managed to whisper to him. "We did the right thing. Daniel would be proud." Richard hoped she was right. Back in his cell, he had nothing to do but think about the choice they made. Was he being stubborn? Could he have done more good by accepting the government's offer and working within the system? But every time he doubted himself, he remembered Daniel's final words in his mission report. His son had chosen truth over obedience, courage over convenience. Richard could do no less. 2 weeks passed with no change. Then one morning, Richard woke to find his cell door standing open. A different guard, one he had never seen before, stood waiting. "Come with me," the guard said. "Someone wants to speak with you." Richard followed the guard through corridors he did not recognize until they reached a room with computers and communications equipment. Maya was already there, along with a dozen other people Richard did not recognize. One woman stepped forward and introduced herself as Dr. Lisa Grant, a quantum physicist from MIT. "Mr. Caldwell, we have been following your situation closely," Grant explained. "When you and Maya refused the government's deal, it inspired a lot of us. We realized that if you were willing to go to prison for telling the truth, the least we could do was try to make that truth matter. We have organized a global coalition of scientists, engineers, and concerned citizens. We call ourselves the Legacy Project in honor of your son." Richard felt hope stirring in his chest for the first time in weeks. "What are you doing?" "We are building the Quantum Resonance Network," Grant replied. "Without government permission, researchers in 47 countries are working together, sharing data and resources. We have 8 of the 18 required facilities under construction. The work is progressing faster than anyone thought possible because people want to help. They want to fight for survival." Maya's face lit up with excitement. "How did you get past the security restrictions?" "The technology is supposed to be classified," Grant smiled. "It was classified until you released it publicly. Now anyone with an internet connection can access the specifications. Governments are scrambling to shut down the construction sites, but there are too many of them spread across too many countries. Every time they shut one down, 2 more open. It is like trying to stop water from flowing." Richard laughed for the first time since his arrest. "How did you get in here to tell me this?" "We have supporters everywhere, including within the military and intelligence agencies," Grant explained. "Not everyone agrees with how their superiors handled this situation. Those supporters helped us arrange this meeting. We have about 10 minutes before someone notices the security gap." "What do you need from us?" Maya asked urgently. "We need you both free," Grant said. "You have become symbols of resistance. People want to see you leading this effort. We have transportation arranged to get you out of the country. Canada has agreed to grant you asylum and protection. From there, you can coordinate the global effort without the American government interfering." Richard hesitated. Escaping custody meant he could never return to America. It meant abandoning his companies, his properties, and everything he built over a lifetime. But staying meant being silenced while others fought the battle his son died trying to start. "What about the people helping us?" Richard asked. "Will they be punished?" "Some of them probably will be," Grant admitted. "But they are willing to take that risk. They believe what you believe, that humanity deserves a fighting chance. The question is whether you are willing to let them take that risk for you." Richard looked at Maya. She nodded without hesitation. She had already lost Daniel. She had nothing left to lose except the chance to honor his sacrifice. Richard realized he felt the same way. His old life was already gone. The only thing that mattered now was finishing what Daniel started. "Get us out of here," Richard said. "Tell me what needs to be done." The next few hours passed in a blur. Grant's team moved Richard and Maya through underground passages that Richard never knew existed beneath the detention facility. They emerged in a parking garage where a van waited. The driver handed them new identification papers and clothes that would help them blend in as ordinary travelers. The van drove them to a small private airfield where a plane waited with Canadian markings. As they boarded, Richard looked back at the country he was leaving behind. He was abandoning his home, his wealth, and his freedom. But he was gaining something more valuable, which was purpose. Maya sat beside him as the plane took off. She still wore Daniel's engagement ring on her finger. "Do you think we can actually do this?" she asked quietly. "Do you think we can build the network in time?" "I think we have to try," Richard replied. Daniel died believing it was possible. All those people in the Legacy Project believe it is possible. Who am I to say they are wrong? The plane climbed higher. Canada welcomed Richard and Maya as heroes rather than fugitives. The Canadian Prime Minister herself met them at the airport in Toronto, shaking their hands in front of dozens of cameras. She announced that Canada would fully support the Legacy Project and provide facilities, funding, and personnel to help build the quantum resonance network. Within days, other countries followed Canada's lead. Japan, Germany, Brazil, Australia, and 15 other nations pledged their support. Even countries that traditionally distrusted each other put aside their differences to work on the project. The threat of extinction had a way of making old rivalries seem petty and meaningless. Richard set up headquarters in a research facility outside Vancouver. Maya worked beside him, coordinating thousands of scientists across the globe. They communicated through encrypted channels, sharing designs and troubleshooting problems in real time. The quantum resonance generators were incredibly complex machines, and every facility building them encountered unique challenges. The Legacy Project grew faster than anyone anticipated. What started as a few dozen researchers became thousands, then tens of thousands. Engineers donated their expertise. Construction workers volunteered their labor. Regular citizens sent whatever money they could spare to fund the effort. A grandmother in India sent $5 with a note that read, "This is all I have, but I want to help save my grandchildren." Richard read that note and cried. He had spent his life building wealth and power, but he had never felt as rich as he did holding that $5 donation from someone who had almost nothing but gave it anyway. Humanity's capacity for generosity and courage in the face of doom reminded him why Daniel thought they were worth saving. But not everyone supported their efforts. The United States government continued to insist that the Legacy Project was a dangerous distraction from the proper evacuation plans. They pressured allied nations to withdraw support and threatened economic sanctions against countries that continued helping. Some nations buckled under the pressure, but others held firm. 3 months before the harvesters were scheduled to arrive, the Legacy Project had completed 14 of the 18 required facilities. The generators were online and functional, but Maya's calculations showed they were not producing enough quantum interference. The harvester fleet was simply too large. They needed more power, more coherence, and better coordination between the facilities. Maya worked around the clock trying to solve the problem. Richard watched her drive herself to exhaustion, surviving on coffee and determination. Finally, one night at 3 a.m, she burst into Richard's office with wild eyes and shaking hands. "I found something in Daniel's notes," Maya said breathlessly, "something the Viridian Collective might not have fully understood. Human consciousness has unique quantum properties. Our brains operate at quantum levels in ways that most biological systems do not. That is why humans are so creative and unpredictable compared to other Earth species." Richard tried to follow her explanation, but the technical language lost him quickly. "What does that mean for the defense network?" he asked. Maya pulled up diagrams on Richard's computer screen. "The quantum resonance generators create interference patterns, but those patterns are mathematical and predictable. The harvesters might be able to adapt to them given enough time, but if we link human consciousness directly into the network, we can create interference patterns that have no mathematical formula. Every human brain would add randomness and creativity that makes the interference impossible to predict or counter. How do we link human consciousness to machines? Richard asked. That sounds like science fiction. It should be impossible, Maya admitted. But the Viridian technology includes something they called neural interface protocols. I think they discovered how to connect biological brains to quantum computers. The specifications are in the files. We could build neural interface devices that let people connect their consciousness directly to the resonance network. Richard felt cold, despite the warm office. What would that do to the people who connect? Would it be dangerous? Maya hesitated, and that hesitation told Richard everything he needed to know. The neural load would be extreme, she said carefully. Human brains are not designed to process quantum-level information. The strain could cause permanent damage. Seizures, strokes, brain death. We would be asking people to risk their lives and their minds to power the defense network. Would it work? Richard asked. If people volunteered to do this, would it be enough to stop the harvesters? The math suggests yes, Maya replied. If we had enough volunteers, maybe a few 100,000 people connected simultaneously, the combined quantum interference from all those unique consciousnesses would be overwhelming. The harvesters would have no way to process or adapt to that level of chaos. Richard stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over Vancouver. People were waking up, going to work, living their lives. In 3 months, those lives might end unless someone made an impossible sacrifice. We cannot ask people to do this, Richard said quietly. We cannot ask hundreds of thousands of people to risk brain death to power a machine. We do not have a choice, Maya replied. Without this, the network will fail. The math is clear. We need human consciousness in the system, or everything we have built will be useless. Richard turned to face her. What about you? Would you volunteer to connect to this network, knowing it might kill you? Maya did not hesitate. Yes, immediately, without question. Why? Richard demanded. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why would you throw it away? Because Daniel threw his life away for strangers, Maya said simply. Because every person who donated money or time or effort to this project deserves someone willing to match their sacrifice. Because if we are going to ask others to risk everything, someone has to be willing to go first. Richard saw the determination in her eyes and knew he could not change her mind. Maya had loved Daniel, and Daniel's death had transformed her into someone who valued purpose more than safety. She would connect to the network regardless of what Richard said. If you do this, then I do it too, Richard said. I will not ask you to take a risk I am not willing to take myself. Maya smiled sadly. You are 72 years old, Richard. The neural strain could kill you within minutes. You would be throwing your life away for nothing. Then I will die having done something meaningful, Richard replied. My son died young trying to save people. The least I can do is die old doing the same thing. They stared at each other for a long moment, two people who had found purpose in grief and connection in shared loss. Finally, Maya nodded. We announce it tomorrow. We tell the world what we need and let them decide if they are willing to help. The announcement caused global upheaval. Maya explained the situation in a broadcast watched by billions of people. She described the neural interface technology, the risks involved, and the number of volunteers they needed. She made clear that connecting to the network could result in permanent brain damage or death. She did not sugarcoat the danger or make false promises about safety. We are asking for the impossible, Maya concluded. We are asking hundreds of thousands of you to risk your lives to power a defense system that has never been tested at full scale. We cannot promise you will survive. We cannot even promise the system will work. All we can offer is a chance to fight, a chance to save everyone instead of abandoning billions to die. If you are willing to take that chance, contact the Legacy Project. We will provide the neural interface devices and coordinate the global connection. Together we can show the harvesters that humanity does not surrender easily. Richard expected maybe a few thousand volunteers, desperate people with nothing to lose or idealists willing to die for a cause. What happened instead shocked him to his core. Within 24 hours, 50 million people registered as volunteers. Within 48 hours, the number reached 200 million. People from every country, every age group, every background, young and old, rich and poor, healthy and sick. They volunteered knowing they might die, and they volunteered anyway. Richard read through volunteer applications with tears streaming down his face. A father of 3 wrote, "My children deserve a future. If my death can give them that, it is a fair trade." A teenage girl wrote, "I want to matter. I want my life to mean something." An elderly man wrote, "I am going to die soon anyway. At least this way my death can help." The response was so overwhelming that the Legacy Project had to create a selection system. They could not connect billions of people to the network. The infrastructure could not handle that many simultaneous connections. They needed to choose who would be allowed to volunteer. Maya established criteria based on neural compatibility and geographic distribution. They needed volunteers spread across the planet to create maximum quantum interference. Age was not a significant factor. Young brains handled the strain better, but older brains contributed different quantum patterns that added useful chaos to the system. Richard qualified for selection despite his age. Maya tried to argue that he should stay disconnected to coordinate the project if she died, but Richard refused to listen. He would connect to the network alongside Maya and everyone else willing to risk everything. The neural interface devices. The final 2 weeks before the Harvester arrival passed in a blur of preparation and fear. The 18 quantum resonance facilities stood ready, massive structures humming with power as they waited for activation. Neural interface devices had been distributed to 300,000 volunteers across every continent. The number was lower than Maya hoped for, but higher than she feared. It would have to be enough. Richard spent his last days visiting the facilities and meeting volunteers. He shook hands with people who would soon risk their minds alongside him. Each person had their own reason for volunteering, their own story of why they chose courage over safety. In Tokyo, Richard met a woman named Keiko who worked as a school teacher. She was 43 years old with 2 children. When Richard asked why she volunteered, knowing she might never see her children again, Keiko smiled gently. "My daughter asked me what I was fighting for," Keiko explained. "I told her I was fighting so she could grow up in a world where people did not give up when things became difficult. I want her to remember that her mother tried. Even if I die, she will know I tried." In Johannesburg, Richard met a 19-year-old student named Thabo who had been accepted to medical school before volunteering. Thabo's parents begged him not to do it, but he felt the neural connection was more important than his future career. "I want to be a doctor to save lives," Thabo said. "But if the Harvesters destroy Earth, there will be no one left to save. This is my chance to save everyone at once. How could I walk away from that?" Every volunteer had a similar story. They were ordinary people who made extraordinary choices. Richard felt humbled by their courage and ashamed that he once thought wealth and power made him special. These people had nothing compared to his fortune, but they possessed something far more valuable, which was the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. Maya continued to refine the network protocols, making small adjustments to improve efficiency and reduce risk to volunteers. She barely slept, working 18 to 20 hours each day. Richard worried she would collapse before the activation, but she refused to slow down. "Every improvement I make might save lives," Maya said when Richard suggested she rest. "How can I sleep knowing that?" 3 days before activation, representatives from the United States government arrived in Vancouver demanding to speak with Richard. Secretary Price and General Hughes came personally. Their faces grim and tired, they met in a conference room under heavy security. "We are here to make one final offer," Price said without preamble. "Shut down the Legacy Project. Send the volunteers home. Let us proceed with the colony ship evacuation. We have analyzed your network design, and our scientists believe it will fail. You are going to kill 300,000 people for nothing." "Your scientists also said building the network was impossible," Maya replied coldly. "Yet here we are with 18 facilities operational. Forgive me if I do not trust their analysis." Hughes leaned forward, his voice almost pleading. "Even if the network works, you do not understand what you are doing to those volunteers. The neural strain is worse than you think. Our research shows that 90% of connected individuals will suffer permanent brain damage. Most will die. You are leading a mass suicide." "We have been honest about the risks," Richard said. "Every volunteer knows what they are facing. They chose this willingly." "They chose it because you gave them false hope," Price countered. "You made them believe they could be heroes." "But heroes die, Richard. They die badly, and their deaths accomplish nothing except making the survivors feel guilty." Maya stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You came here to convince us to quit. You failed. The network activates in 3 days whether you approve or not. Now get out of our facility." Price and Hughes exchanged glances. Hughes reached into his jacket and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table to Richard. "This is an executive order authorizing military action to shut down the Legacy project by force. We did not want to use it, but you are leaving us no choice. Stand down now or we will shut you down." Richard picked up the document and read it carefully. The order was signed by the President of the United States and authorized the use of military force against Legacy project facilities on international soil. It was an act of war disguised as law enforcement. "You cannot do this," Richard said. "These facilities are on sovereign territory of allied nations. If you attack them, you will be starting wars with countries that trusted you. Those countries will understand we are trying to prevent a disaster," Price replied. "Most of them are already having second thoughts about supporting this project. When we explain the risks to their citizens, they will withdraw their support." Maya laughed bitterly. "You still do not understand. This is not about governments anymore. This is about people choosing to fight for their survival. You can shut down our facilities, but you cannot shut down the will of 300,000 volunteers. They will find a way to connect even if they have to build their own facilities." Hughes shook his head sadly. "You are condemning them to death, Maya. I hope you can live with that when this is over." "I will be dead too," Maya replied. "I am connecting to the network alongside them. If we fail together. That is more than you can say." "Where will you be when the harvesters arrive, General? Safe on your colony ship with the other cowards?" The meeting ended with nothing resolved. Price and Hughes left, and Richard knew they would attempt to shut down the project. But they had misjudged the situation. The Legacy project had grown beyond any government's ability to control. Even if they destroyed the facilities, the volunteers would find ways to connect. The neural interface devices were simple enough that engineers could build them anywhere with basic equipment. Richard and Maya prepared for the worst. They distributed backup copies of all technical specifications to volunteers, ensuring that even if headquarters was destroyed, the network could still be activated. They established redundant communication channels and contingency protocols. Whatever the government tried, the project would continue. 2 days before activation, military forces surrounded several Legacy project facilities. Soldiers established perimeters and demanded everyone inside surrender. But the facilities were protected by the host nations, who deployed their own military forces to prevent American interference. The situation became a tense standoff with armed forces facing each other across barbed wire fences. Richard watched news coverage of the confrontations with a sick feeling in his stomach. This was exactly what the harvesters wanted: humanity fighting itself instead of preparing for the real threat. But he could not back down now. Too many people had invested too much hope in the project. The night before activation, Richard placed the neural interface band around his head. He did not activate it yet, but he wanted to feel its weight, to understand what he was committing to. Maya found him sitting alone in his office, staring at the metal device in his hands. "Are you afraid?" Maya asked gently. "Terrified," Richard admitted. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What if the network fails? What if we die for nothing? What if the government is right and we are just leading people to meaningless deaths?" Maya sat down beside him and took his hand. "Daniel was afraid too. He told me that in his last message before the mission. He said fear was natural when facing the unknown. But he also said that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite fear. I miss him." Richard said softly. "I miss my son every day. Sometimes I wonder if I am doing this to honor him, or just because I cannot accept that his death was meaningless." "His death was not meaningless," Maya replied. "Daniel died trying to warn humanity. We are finishing what he started. Whether we succeed or fail, we tried. That matters, Richard. Trying matters." They sat together in silence for a while, two people united by loss and purpose. Finally, Richard activated his neural interface. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before. His consciousness expanded outward, touching thousands of other minds already connected to the network. He felt their fear and hope, their courage and doubt, all blending together into a symphony of human emotion. Maya was right. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The next morning, the final activation sequence began. 300,000 volunteers across the planet activated their neural interfaces simultaneously. The quantum resonance network came online at full power. and the combined consciousness of hundreds of thousands of humans began generating interference patterns, unlike anything the universe had ever seen. Richard felt himself dissolving into the network, his individual thoughts becoming part of a vast collective consciousness. He could feel Maya nearby, her presence strong and steady. He could feel Keiko in Tokyo thinking about her children. He could feel Thabo in Johannesburg hoping he would survive to become a doctor. He could feel all of them, every volunteer contributing their unique perspective to the quantum chaos. The strain was immediate and overwhelming. Richard felt his brain struggling to process the flood of information. His heart raced and his breathing became labored. Around the world, volunteers began collapsing as their bodies failed under the neural load. Some died within minutes. Others held on, fighting to stay conscious and connected. The harvesters arrived exactly when the Viridian probe predicted they would. They did not announce themselves or send warnings. They simply appeared at the edge of the solar system, massive geometric constructs that violated every law of physics humanity understood. Through the quantum network, Richard could sense them. They were not alive in any biological sense, but they possessed consciousness of a sort. Cold mathematical consciousness driven by equations and efficiency. They had consumed thousands of worlds across billions of years, and Earth was just another target in their endless harvest. The harvester fleet consisted of 17 primary vessels, each one larger than Earth's moon. They moved through space without propulsion, simply existing where they needed to be as if distance and time were suggestions rather than rules. Smaller constructs surrounded the primary vessels like a swarm of insects, each one capable of stripping a continent clean of life in days. Humanity watched the arrival through telescopes and deep space sensors. News broadcasts showed the images, massive shapes hanging in the darkness like predatory gods. People who were not connected to the network felt terror. People who were connected felt something different. They felt determination. Through the network, Richard experienced the collective consciousness of 300,000 minds united in purpose. Individual thoughts blended together, but individual identity remained. He was still Richard Caldwell, but he was also part of something larger. He was humanity's immune system, fighting an infection that threatened the entire organism. Maya's presence in the network was strong and clear. She directed the quantum interference patterns, adjusting frequencies and amplitudes to maximize disruption. Her scientific mind worked faster connected to the network than it ever could alone. She saw patterns in the quantum foam of reality that no human had seen before, and she used those patterns as weapons. The harvesters began their approach to Earth. Their trajectory calculated for maximum efficiency. They would reach Earth's orbit in 60 hours and begin the harvesting process. But as they moved, they encountered the first layers of quantum interference from humanity's defense network. Richard felt the moment of contact. The harvester's mathematical consciousness tried to process the interference and failed. The patterns made no sense to them. Human thought was chaotic in ways their algorithms could not predict. Fear and hope, love and hate, creativity and destruction all mixed together in quantum fluctuations that followed no formula. The harvester fleet slowed, recalculating their approach. Their machine intelligence tried to adapt, adjusting their quantum frequencies to bypass the interference. But every adjustment they made, the network countered. 300,000 human minds working in unconscious harmony created new patterns faster than the harvesters could analyze them. In Tokyo, Keiko felt the strain intensifying. Her thoughts became fragmented as the neural load increased. She thought about her daughter, about the promise she made to try. Through the network, thousands of other volunteers supported her, lending strength when hers failed. She held on. In Johannesburg, Thabo's body convulsed as his brain struggled to maintain the connection. Blood vessels burst in his eyes and nose, but he refused to disconnect. He thought about his future as a doctor, about all the lives he might save if humanity survived. Through the network, other volunteers felt his determination and drew courage from it. Richard felt his heart failing. At 72 years old, his body could not sustain the neural strain much longer. His vision blurred and his breathing became shallow. But through the network, he felt Daniel's presence supporting him, giving him strength he did not know he possessed. He would not disconnect. Not while the battle continued. The harvesters launched their first offensive. They released quantum weapons designed to collapse the interference patterns by force. Waves of destructive energy swept across the solar system, targeting the resonance facilities on Earth and in orbit. 3 facilities were destroyed instantly. The quantum generators exploded, and the volunteers connected to those facilities died as the neural feedback tore through their minds. Richard felt their deaths through the network. 3,000 consciousnesses extinguished in moments. The pain was excruciating, but the network held. The remaining 15 facilities compensated for the losses, and the interference patterns stabilized. Maya redirected the quantum flow, adapting to the new configuration. Her consciousness expanded across the network, touching every volunteer and coordinating their contributions. She became more than human, more than machine. She became the living embodiment of humanity's will to survive. The harvesters attacked again, targeting 2 more facilities. One was destroyed completely. The other survived but was badly damaged, operating at reduced capacity. More volunteers died, their sacrifice adding to the growing weight of loss Richard carried in his consciousness. But something was happening. The harvesters' attacks were becoming less precise, less efficient. The quantum interference was disrupting their coordination. The 17 primary vessels were beginning to operate independently rather than as a unified fleet. Their mathematical consciousness, so perfect and efficient when operating within predictable parameters, was failing when faced with human chaos. Richard felt a surge of hope through the network. They were winning. Against all odds, humanity's desperate defense was actually working. The harvesters recognized the threat and changed tactics. Instead of trying to destroy the facilities, they began attacking the volunteers directly. They sent quantum pulses targeting the neural interface connections, trying to sever the links between human consciousness and the defense network. Volunteers began dying by the thousands. Their brains could not withstand the quantum assault. Some died instantly. Others lingered in agony as their neural pathways burned out. The network began losing coherence as the number of active connections dropped. Maya struggled to maintain control. Her consciousness fractured under the strain, pieces of her identity fragmenting across the quantum field. She was dying, her brilliant mind consumed by the effort of holding the network together. But she refused to let go, not yet. Not while there was still a chance. Richard felt himself failing too. His heart could barely beat. His lungs could barely draw breath. But through the network, he felt the presence of volunteers who kept fighting despite their own pain. He felt Keiko holding on for her daughter. He felt Thabo holding on for his dream of saving lives. He felt millions of people watching the battle and willing them to succeed, and he felt Daniel, his son's consciousness, preserved in the quantum field as an echo of his sacrifice, wrapped around Richard like a protective shield. Daniel had always been stronger than him. Even in death, Daniel protected his father. The harvesters made their final push. They concentrated all their power on Earth, determined to break through the interference by sheer force. The quantum weapons they unleashed would destroy most life on the planet, even if the harvest failed. They were no longer trying to consume Earth. They were trying to sterilize it. Maya made a choice. She redirected all the network's power into a single focused burst of quantum interference, gambling everything on one overwhelming attack. The strain would kill most remaining volunteers instantly. It might kill all of them, but it was their only chance to drive the harvesters back. "Forgive me," Maya whispered through the network. "Forgive me for asking this." Richard understood what she planned. He felt every other volunteer understand as well. They had volunteered knowing they might die. This was the moment their sacrifice would matter. Through the network, Richard felt 300,000 consciousnesses agree without words. They would give everything for this final attack. Maya released the burst. The quantum interference exploded outward from Earth like a supernova, a wall of chaos and creativity that slammed into the harvester fleet with unimaginable force. The mathematical consciousness of the harvesters tried to process it and failed completely. Their systems overloaded, their coordination shattered. Their quantum weapons misfired, destroying their own vessels. Richard felt the network collapsing. Volunteers died by the tens of thousands as the neural feedback consumed their minds. He felt their consciousnesses dissolving, individual thoughts and dreams and hopes ending in an instant. The pain was beyond description, beyond endurance. But through it all he felt pride. They had done it. They had driven back the harvesters. Through dying eyes, Richard saw the harvester fleet breaking apart. Some vessels exploded, others retreated, their damaged systems unable to maintain coherence. The smaller constructs drifted aimlessly, their connection to the primary vessels severed. For the first time in billions of years, the harvesters had encountered something they could not consume or understand. Richard's consciousness began to fade. His heart stopped beating. His brain began shutting down. But before the darkness took him, he felt Daniel one more time. "You did good, Dad." His son's voice echoed through the quantum field. "You saved them. You saved everyone." Richard smiled and let go. Around the planet, hundreds of thousands of volunteers died at the same moment. Their consciousnesses dissolved into the quantum field, becoming part of the universe itself. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The harvester fleet retreated beyond the solar system, damaged and confused. The world that emerged after the battle was forever changed. 253,000 people had died defending Earth, their consciousnesses sacrificed to power the quantum network. Every nation mourned. Every community held memorials. Every survivor carried the weight of those deaths. Maya Torres became the face of humanity's survival. She did not want the attention or the responsibility, but she had no choice. She was one of the few people who understood what happened during those 72 hours when the quantum network operated at full power. She was the scientific director who coordinated the defense. She was the woman who made the impossible choice to sacrifice hundreds of thousands to save billions. The governments that opposed the Legacy Project were forced to acknowledge their mistake. Secretary Price resigned in disgrace. General Hughes faced court-martial for his role in covering up the original threat. The colony ship program was exposed to public scrutiny, and the officials who planned to abandon humanity while saving themselves were voted out of office or imprisoned. But Maya took no satisfaction in their downfall. Too many good people had died. The victory felt hollow and weighed against the cost. 6 months after the battle, Maya stood at Daniel's grave once again. The cemetery had expanded to include a memorial garden for everyone who died in the quantum network. 253,000 names were carved into black marble walls that stretched across 10 acres. Richard Caldwell's name was there, along with Keiko and Thabo and all the others. Maya touched Richard's name gently. He had become like a father to her in the months they worked together. His death left a hole in her heart that would never fully heal. But she knew he died the way he wanted, fighting to finish what his son started. The quantum network had permanent effects beyond just driving away the harvesters. The neural interfaces created connections between human consciousnesses that did not entirely disappear when the network shut down. The 47,000 survivors found they could sense each other faintly, feeling emotions and sometimes even sharing thoughts across distances. It was nothing like the full network connection, but it was enough to change how they related to each other and the world. Scientists called it quantum entanglement of consciousness. The survivors called it the link. Whatever the name, it represented something new in human evolution. People who had been connected to the network could never be fully alone again. They carried pieces of each other in their minds. Maya felt the link most strongly with other survivors who worked on the scientific aspects of the project. Together, they began analyzing the data collected during the network's operation. What they discovered was staggering. Human consciousness, when properly coordinated, could manipulate quantum reality in ways previously thought impossible. The Viridian technology had shown them the door. The battle with the harvesters forced them through it. Now humanity stood on the threshold of a revolution in physics, engineering, and understanding of consciousness itself. Maya published her findings in papers that were simultaneously too technical for most people to understand and too important to ignore. Other scientists built on her work. Within a year, they developed new technologies based on quantum consciousness principles, medical treatments that used quantum resonance to repair brain damage, communication systems that operated faster than light by using quantum entanglement, energy generation that tapped directly into the quantum field. The world transformed rapidly. Technologies that should have taken decades to develop were created in months. The survivors of the quantum network formed the core of research teams, their enhanced understanding of quantum mechanics accelerating progress impossibly fast. But Maya's most important discovery came 18 months after the battle. She found evidence in the quantum field itself, traces of consciousnesses that should have disappeared when the network volunteers died. The quantum field had preserved them somehow like echoes frozen in time, Daniel was there. Richard was there. All 253,000 were there, their consciousnesses existing in a state between life and death. Maya spent months trying to understand what she had found. She consulted with physicists, neuroscientists, and philosophers. Nobody could explain it. Consciousness, it seemed, was more than just brain activity. It was a quantum phenomenon that could persist even after the physical brain died. She could not bring them back. Their physical bodies were gone, their brains destroyed by the neural strain, but their consciousnesses remained accessible through the quantum field. And Maya developed a way to communicate with them. The first time she touched Daniel's consciousness through the quantum field, Maya cried for hours. He was still there, still himself, existing in a state of pure thought without body or physical limitations. He told her he was proud of what she accomplished. He told her he loved her. He told her to live her life fully and not spend it mourning him. I am not gone, Daniel's consciousness explained through the quantum connection. I am just different. We all are. We chose to sacrifice ourselves, but the universe found a way to preserve what made us who we were. Tell my father he was right. Consciousness is the most powerful force that exists, and it cannot be truly destroyed. Maya shared her discovery with the world. The revelation that consciousness survived death in quantum form changed every religion, philosophy, and understanding of what it meant to be human. Death was no longer an ending but a transformation. The people who died defending Earth were not gone. They existed in a new form, accessible to those who knew how to reach the quantum field. The Link survivors became guides, teaching others how to touch the quantum field and communicate with the preserved consciousnesses. Families spoke with loved ones who died in the network. Children heard their parents' voices one more time. The grief remained, but it was tempered by the knowledge that death was not absolute. Maya herself learned she was pregnant 4 months after the battle. The neural strain should have made pregnancy impossible, but somehow life found a way. She gave birth to a healthy boy and named him Daniel, honoring the man she loved and the sacrifice he made. Young Daniel would grow up in a world transformed by his namesake's courage, a world where humanity reached for the stars with confidence instead of fear, a world where consciousness itself was understood as the fundamental building block of reality. Richard Caldwell's fortune was used to establish the Caldwell Foundation, dedicated to developing quantum consciousness technology and supporting the families of network volunteers. Maya served as director, ensuring that the sacrifice of 253,000 people led to benefits for all humanity, rather than enriching a select few. Earth began terraforming Mars using quantum technology. Colony ships were built not to flee but to explore and expand. First contact protocols were established for when humanity eventually encountered other intelligent species. The Viridian Collective's warning had included coordinates for other civilizations that survived the harvesters. Humanity began sending its own warning probes, sharing the quantum resonance technology with anyone who might face the same threat. 5 years after the battle, Maya stood at the memorial garden with young Daniel in her arms. The boy had his father's eyes and his father's gentle nature. He gurgled happily as Maya walked among the carved names, telling him stories about the people who died so he could live. She stopped at Richard Caldwell's name and touched the marble gently. I wish you could have met him, Maya said softly. You would have been a wonderful grandfather. Through the link, she felt a response. Richard's consciousness, preserved in the quantum field, touched her mind briefly. She felt his love and his pride. She felt him tell her that he was watching, that he saw his grandson, that he was grateful beyond words. Maya smiled through tears and continued walking. She passed Keiko's name and felt that brave teacher's presence in the quantum field, still thinking about her children even in death. She passed Thebo's name and felt the young medical student's consciousness, still dreaming of saving lives even though his physical body was gone. All 253,000 were there, preserved forever in the quantum field that connected all consciousness. They were humanity's guardians, its ancestors, its inspiration. Their sacrifice ensured that humanity would never face extinction quietly again. Young Daniel looked up at his mother and smiled. He could not understand the significance of where they stood or what it represented, but someday he would. Someday Maya would tell him about his father, about Richard, about the impossible choice that saved the world. She would tell him that he was named for a hero who believed humanity was worth dying for. And she would tell him that consciousness, human consciousness with all its chaos and creativity and unpredictability, was the most powerful force in the universe. The harvesters learned that lesson. The Viridian Collective discovered it too late to save themselves, but humanity learned it just in time and they would never forget. Maya looked up at the sky where stars were beginning to appear in the twilight. Somewhere out there the harvesters still existed, still consuming worlds, but Earth was protected now. Not by weapons or walls, but by the collective consciousness of a species that refused to surrender. Other worlds would need the same protection. Other species would face the same threat. And humanity,